Anyway, Benedict Spence is here. Benedict, very good morning to you.
Morning. Sorry, I'm just laughing. Listening to
I mean, we
gets me every time. I don't
talk
know what
about...
it is. There's something both incredibly dignified and also very menacing about a Scottish reporter saying yes or no. Do you back it?
It's
Yes or
just,
no?
she's going to go, tell
Yeah,
me.
you don't know if he's going to sort of stay very poised and dignified, or as you say, he's just going to lose his temper completely.
But Davy Russell, the candidate, the now MSP for Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, he doesn't appear to be imbued with a great deal of common sense, does he?
No, he doesn't. Not a great public speaker, that one.
Not really. Well, they wouldn't let him do the debate, and now you see why.
Yeah, I heard that they weren't going to let him do that, and I thought it was just because the party didn't want to be embarrassed by questions about policy, rather than it's the actual candidate who can't answer
who
them.
can't put two sentences together. But I mean, it's funny this morning because you would expect, Labour to be all over the airwaves crowing about, despite what everybody says, we've won the election. But they're sort of not doing it because it seems they're kind of slightly embarrassed about it because, of course, it shouldn't be a surprise that Labour win an election, but it sort of is.
Yeah, and I think it is a surprise result. I think it's largely, I'll be honest with you, I think there's probably, because there's the sort of the motivation from local voters to rally behind the Labour candidate, because actually, in the face of other things, Labour is always seen as a much more Scottish party north of the border than the Tories or certainly Reform, which, we heard a lot about this in the build-up to the by-election rhetoric about how Reform is an English party. It's a sort of an English nationalist sort of party, and that its values aren't very Scottish. So I do think... I think as much as north of the border, I think there's a lot of discontent with the electoral system, the old party system.
Yeah.
I still think it's going to take a little longer for that dam to break, so to speak, and it's understandably so, because they look at everything that isn't Labour or the party with Scottish in it, and they go, well, that's a bit English for us, so we'll still hold on to it.
And they did they tried, I mean, it's bad news for the SNP. I mean, I know that we're starting to get a bit sort of localised up in Scotland there, but it's very bad news for the SNP who held this seat and who have now lost it, because it shows that the damage that Nicola Sturgeon did to the party, I think, is pretty much terminal.
Yeah, I think the SNP survived because the Tories were doing well in Westminster and because Labour were not a viable alternative, and people were fed up with Labour in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. The SNP have not governed well in Scotland at all, and I think that it was only a matter of time, actually, before opinions turned against them. But as you say, the vote for Labour is not really a vote for Labour. It's a vote against, in this case, the SNP, and also against Reform as a very deliberate, we don't want this sort of English party coming in. But the situation in Scotland, you're right to say that we're sort of getting a bit Scotland-centric talking about the subject now, but it is worth talking about because it gets lost in the sort of the milieu of Westminster politics.
Yes.
And that is that actually Scotland has just been in some ways, even worsely governed than the rest of the country has.
Yes, it has. And I mean, we're going to find out, I guess, soon that Wales has also similarly been worsely governed, as you say. Very Trumpian phrase, that, worsely governed.
Worsely governed. Sorry about
Bigly. But yeah,
I was up very late last night following the Trump meltdown. So
yes, well, let's talk about the Trump-Musk scenario, because it's quite fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, it's phenomenal. I couldn't stop laughing. I mean, I don't know whose house J.D. Vance is going to spend Christmas at. It's going to be very awkward.
Right.
But, I mean, the breakdown...
But you knew it was going to happen, didn't you, in the end?
Yeah, the egos were just too large, and the prevailing sort of worldviews, I think, were just too disparate. Elon Musk has these, some would say, quite eccentric views about what government should do and about what companies should do. And Donald Trump's base is not really about getting to Mars. It's not really about electric vehicles or anything like that. We're talking about, MAGA Republicans are not those kind of people. And then I think just the very different characters of the two was always going to lead to some tensions. Trump is quite flamboyant in his own way, but Musk is slightly electrified. He's like an eel when he's on stage. So I'm not surprised that it did happen. And also, frankly, given that this is the age of social media, I'm not surprised that it is being played out on social media rather than behind closed doors. The actual allegations are a bit fruity, bit interesting, but that collision was always set to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually got back together down the line and made up again, because these are two people who are able to do that. But for the rest of us, it is very entertaining in the short term.
It is, because let's not forget. I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago since Elon Musk presented Donald Trump with a Tesla. Do you remember? And he got into it. It was sort of about to drive it around, and then I think Caroline Leavitt certainly, and a couple of the other members of staff got in the Trump Tesla and drove it around and took pictures, and it was all very sort of hail fellow, well met. But Musk is also a guy who admitted, I think it was last week or so, that during the time that he was working on Doge and he was in and out of the White House, he was on ketamine quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a thing to admit to.
It really is.
We've come a long way
tranquilizer.
We've come a long way from Bill Clinton. Yeah, I tried dope, but I didn't inhale.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. When I decided to, slash 600 billion from the Defence Department's budget, I was high on ketamine. Great.
I suppose if anything particularly important comes out in the wash later, I don't know, we've accidentally cancelled the Department for Nuclear Defence in Doge. You can always turn around and go, well, in my defence, I was on a lot of horse tranquilizers.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to ask you about the reform situation as well. Front page of the Telegraph today. I've heard from various people this morning very different views about the Zia Yusuf bust-up with Nigel Farage, whether it was a bust-up, whether it wasn't a bust-up, whether he was just he ran out of road, he was just frustrated by the process. I mean, it only seemed a couple of days ago that Zia Yusuf was being very fulsome in his attack on waste in local government.
I think that this is... Two things can be true at once. It's a mistake in that I think that this is another sign of indiscipline in the party, and I know that Zia Yusuf was not particularly popular amongst a lot of grassroots members, but he did serve a valuable function in the attempts to professionalise the party in terms of fundraising and in terms of network building. He was an organizer. He was good at that. At the same time, I don't think this is going to dent Reform's polling at all. I don't think most people, even a lot of Reform voters, actually know who Zia Yusuf is. So I think two things can be true at once. Farage was very, I think, kind towards him in his message after he left.
Yes.
He was flattering, which is very different to how he was about both Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe, which is, on the one hand, possibly a sign that he understands he needs to appear more professional when these departures inevitably happen. Or it could be a sign that actually he did quite value Zia Yusuf and that he does think that this could potentially be a loss.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's the organizational aspect and the fundraising aspect. In terms of the actual polling, I don't think this is going to have any impact on Reform.
I don't think it will. I mean, my interest is in the sort of the investigation, if you like, of the local councils. They started in Kent just this week, at the beginning of this week. And Nathaniel Reid, the guy who was sort of the data guy that they brought in, has also gone as well, which means I wonder who they're going to now get to do that. And I asked Isabel Oakeshott that because we couldn't get an official from Reform on today, and she said, "Oh, there's going to be loads of people crawling all over all that stuff, so you don't have to worry about it." But surely it needs to have a sort of a man at the top, doesn't it? It needs to have a sort of a man at the head of it.
Yeah, to say that there's going to be loads of people who are going to be keen on doing it, okay, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be the right people for the job at all. It doesn't mean that that they're going to be answering to the right person. That's what is important about putting in place these sorts of hierarchical structures in a political party. And the one thing that I would say about Reform is, whilst it definitely has a leader at the top, beyond that, it is a bit of a mess. And whilst, again, I'll say this in the short term, whilst that's not going to hurt their polling because they're not yet in a position to mess anything up too badly, they're not in a national government, they're only doing things at a local level. If you want to survive long term, you do need these structures in place. You need plans in place. I mean, for heaven's sake, looking at what's happening right now with Labour, where it turns out actually there isn't much of a plan, and just being a very popular party, very large party, isn't good enough. And I think whilst you can say, okay, fine, we're very early on in this parliament, they're polling very well, they can get these teething troubles out of the way now and it not hurt them too much. At some point, these bust-ups are going to have to stop. The party is going to have a unified message about everything. Because as things stand right now, if you're a journalist, you're sat there thinking, right, Reform has got a couple of lines on a couple of issues that everybody agrees on. But there's a great big swathe of things, like the burqa, for instance, that they haven't got an official policy on, and nobody's thought to ask them. Why don't I cause some mischief and find a councillor or this MP and see if I can get them to go off at a tangent about something? That's what a sensible say sensible, mischievous media would do. Fortunately for reform, I don't think a lot of the mainstream media, the press media, is actually imaginative to do that.
No, they're really not, I'm afraid. We used to be a lot better at it. But there you go. Thank you, Benedict Spence. Good to talk to you. Have a good weekend. Political commentator there, Benedict Spence, with his view on what's going on at reform.